Hello and welcome to the Ag Culture Podcast, where we cultivate tomorrow by inspiring agripreneurs and ag innovators through real-life perspectives in agriculture. I'm Paul Windemaller, your host on this journey of exploration and growth. Today's episode was a special recording I did while I was traveling in Brazil at the Nuffield Conference, catching up with a fellow scholar from New Zealand named Carlos Bagrie. Carlos has an amazing story. You're going to get a lot of nuggets out of this episode. I'm really excited to share it. I really enjoyed getting to know Carlos at the conference, and he had some really great questions and thought-provoking conversations that we had together. And this is an opportunity to really share his story from being an entrepreneur, taking a company public in New Zealand, as well as having a TV show, and many, many other things, from farm to developing a beer brand to developing a company that delivered meals all over the country of New Zealand. So I know you're going to enjoy this, so please listen up. So Carlos, we're here in Bonito, Mato Grosso do Sul, Brazil. We had spent the week together, getting to know each other as well as 100 other people. And it's been a pleasure. And I thought it'd be a great idea to have you share your story with our audience of the business venture that you and your wife had started, your experience now farming in New Zealand, on probably one of the most beautiful properties in the world. Maybe I'm a little biased because I love New Zealand, but so when you got to the point where your company, your first company, had an IPO,
Yes.
was that a mountaintop experience for you? Was that an experience you say, I made it, this is what I wanted to do, this is what I wanted to accomplish, or did it feel kind of empty?
It felt kind of empty, and I think this is a real, like people think, oh, it's like winning lotto, and there's a real difference, right? Like you buy a lotto ticket and you've done nothing. You've
Right.
put nothing.
You haven't created any value.
You've done nothing, and you win a whole lot of money. You're like, oh yeah, look at me, aren't I special? It's like, no, you're just flat out lucky. When you build something, you give part of your soul to that. Like
Yeah.
you give part of your real energy. A big part of you is in that. And I'll be honest. Once we'd floated the company, I was in this. Like we had done well, and I was at home, and we had a young child at the time. So I think we had an 18-month-old at home. And my wife Nadia she was still doing her work. Like she was out there, she's a celebrity chef, and she was doing her stuff. And I was sort of pushing the stroller around the streets of Auckland, thinking, you know what, I'm kind of a bit flat. Like I sort of thought there'd be more to this. There'd be more layers of happy. Of course, you're happy to start with, because you've slayed the dragon.
Right.
You did it. You've done it. Most people, I think, certainly I was 31, right? So I was pretty young, and
You weren't ready to
no,
retire
I
and
was
hit
not
the
ready
golf
to,
course
no,
for the rest of your life.
I don't even play golf, so that shit would be lost on me. So I was kind of looking for what is the next thing, and I think that's where the whole Royal Burn story came in. It's like, look, what is the next thing? What's the next? I think it's really important in life to keep learning, and keep trying.
That's what life's about.
Yeah, and sometimes, like, not everything you try succeeds, right? Like it's often actually what you've tried, and you go, oh, that didn't work. But you learn. As long as you're learning, that's all good.
Yeah. I want to hear your perspective of being really on both ends of the food channel, as a producer on one end now, and the downstream effect of really dealing with consumers directly, right?
That's it. Yeah, I guess that's what. So my background before farming was marketing. So by trade, I'm a marketer, and I'd worked for corporates with branding and e-commerce and digital stuff. It was a great place to cut my teeth, really.
Yeah.
Now my wife wins this reality TV show. You've probably heard of it, MasterChef, and MasterChef New Zealand is just like MasterChefs everywhere else in the world. Like it's kind of 5 minutes of fame, and there's that risk that if you don't do something with it, then the opportunity, or any commercial opportunity that otherwise might come just sort of dissipates, and you miss your chance.
Yep.
So I quit my job. She quit her job. We both quit our jobs, and we started with no real business plan, no real, like, we were 24. I think she was 24, I was 25, and we had like no idea. And we had a mortgage on a house. I'll never forget coming back and lying down on the floor and staring up at the ceiling, going, "What the hell have we just done?" I left like a really well-paid job. For 25, I was on a pretty good wicket. I was doing well. But Nadia really wanted to push the boat out, and there's one thing I really love, and that's that enthusiasm, that drive to like pick up something and run with it. So yeah, we quit our jobs. We had no business plan, and somehow we found ourselves just doing any gigs we can, anything to make money. But it got us thinking, like, what would be the perfect thing to do? And it became very obvious to me that with Nadia, she could be well remunerated for turning up doing a speaking engagement or some sort of event. But there's only ever one of her. Like, there's only one opportunity for her to make that money, and then that was it.
Yeah, you can't scale that.
You can't scale that. So what's the next thing? And we'd done cookbooks, so we'd done publishing, and that's a hard slog. Like, books are a hard slog up until a point, and after that point, books are great. Like, they tick away, and it's a passive stream of revenue, and everybody's happy. But up to that stage, it's just relentless. You just keep pushing and grinding and hoping, and you're just hustling, basically. So along came an opportunity. So there was 5 founders, and we started a company called My Food Bag. Now, it was a business model that our business partners had seen in Sweden called Linus Mikasas. Probably saying that incorrectly. Any Swedish person listening will be like, "No, that's not how you say it." Anyway, this business model was a food delivery. It was a recipe delivery business, and like a meal kit business. And before meal kit businesses were a thing, certainly in New Zealand, like, no one had ever heard of it. E-commerce, like food e-commerce in New Zealand, was hardly a thing.
Yeah. What year was this?
This would have been 12 years ago.
Okay.
Yeah. So back in the old days, where asking someone for their credit card details online was still like, there was just this hesitation. You're like, you're going to do what? You're going to give me recipes and ingredients to meals that I don't get any control over, and I'm going to pay you in advance? Like, what? So it was an adventure, and I think back to it. It's one of those situations where you're like, is that actually realistically going to work? And it could have just as equally not have worked, but we just got the mix right. We got the publicity right, and it just started snowballing. It was one of those wonderful businesses to be part of, that just every week it was bigger than it was the week before. And after a while, the numbers started becoming quite material. The turnover every month was just doing quite well. So this business, we owned it ourselves exclusively for 4 years, and then at sort of about year 5, we started getting tired. Like, I think this is what I call 4-year-itis, and you see it with a lot of entrepreneurs, where they get to a phase where you're just kind of exhausted and you're just almost over it. Even if the business is really successful, you just go, "Oh, I just want to break." And I think most founders, listening to this, will appreciate that and go, "Yeah, I've felt like this. I've been in that space." And it kind of comes down to like a lack of breadth at the board. Maybe it comes down to like not having all of the roles in the senior leadership team locked down. But whatever happens, it's just something that happens. And we end up selling 70% of the company down to a private equity business, and we were still involved heavily with the company. And then I believe it was 2.5 years after that, 3 years after that, the business was floated on the stock exchange. So that was kind of one of those fun moments. I think as an entrepreneur, you're always like, "Oh, it'll be quite fun to build a business big enough that you end up floating it." So that business was called My Food Bag, and it was a meal kit business in New Zealand, and it's still going strong today. So it's been fun, kind of like watching it from afar. But your initial question was, what's it like kind of being at both ends of the spectrum? And that's a really good question. As a marketer, we're very obsessed with what customers think, with what the end eater, the end drinker, the person who wears that fabric, Like, what is it that they're looking for? Like, what makes them real? And like, I would, well, actually, before I say that, to go back in time, post the sell down, we had some capital, and we're looking at like, how do we deploy that capital? Like, where are we going to put it?
Personally.
Yeah, personally. Yeah, okay. No, personally. So we personally had some capital. We're like, well, what do we do next? And I've always loved land. And I think land gives you options. When you got land, you've got options, and it's a lovely, secure investment. That's not to say that you shouldn't don't trust Carlos's investment advice. Go hard on crypto. Get it, just do whatever you're into. But I would say, for me, like, land was the thing, and there was this beautiful farm for sale in Queenstown, New Zealand, and that farm is like, it's an old, well, in New Zealand language, it's an old historic farm. Like, it goes back to the early pioneering days, and it has an amazing name. So the name of the farm is called Royal Burn. So Royal is in the royal family. Burn, I think in Gaelic means creek or stream or brook. Yep. So Royal Burn Station, and it's a lovely, lovely piece of north. So southern hemisphere. So the sun's north, right? So you're looking for the south. We're looking for the north. So it's got this lovely aspect. You get sun all day, and just incredible vistas, like across the mountains, and it's like living in a postcard. Like, it truly is.
He's not joking.
I've been there. It's gorgeous. So we bought this property, and I thought, look, let's go farming. How hard could that be? And so we bought, I bought a few thousand sheep, and I bought a combine harvester, and I bought a few tractors, and I was like, look, let's go get all this stuff, and let's just go hard. And it was just myself and one other, who I employed kind of just from a neighbour's recommendation down there. And so that's Michelle, and Michelle started with us, kind of a farm labourer come livestock sort of manager come just do whatever kind of needs to be done.
Yep.
And I love this part of the story, right? Because she started there. I came at farming, but I was from a farm, so like, it wasn't all completely new, but I'd never managed a farm. Now, there's a real big difference between growing up on a farm and actually doing it yourself, right? There's a bloody big difference, especially if you've spent a year, like the rest of your life, sitting behind a computer screen, looking at spreadsheets and writing like website copy. So
a little different than getting your hands dirty, right?
Quite different. So anyway, this ticks away, and we farm the farm, as farms that have always been farmed in that region for the first couple of seasons. And we thought, we kind of know what the customer wants. And here we are, just producing commodity product, and we put the lambs on the stock truck and wave goodbye at the farm gate, and we put all the grain in the trucks, and they just drive through the gates. And it sort of felt a little bit like, to me, we were missing a trick. It's like, look, we are food marketers. We have context in the food industry. Like, why wouldn't we start building a direct business,
right.
like
that's what
farm,
you knew.
Farm to plate. It's kind of what we knew, but we're like, shit, it's like building a whole new business. Like, do we have the energy or the enthusiasm to do that? And kind of, again, super naively, we thought, look, we could potentially create a business case or a blueprint for other farmers to look at and go, oh, there's elements of that I could do myself, wherever they are in the world. The farmers could be in Italy, or they could be in England, or they could be in the States, or they could be in Japan, and going, look, we've got this land, we grow this produce, like, how do we extract a higher value for it? And that become our mantra, and still is to today. So the farm's been running in its new phase for 3 years. Michelle, who I talked about before, who started as a kind of shepherdess, general kind of labourer, she's now the general manager of the entire enterprise, and we have about 35 staff. So we have a retail store, we have a farm, we have our own distribution. We built an abattoir, which is really unusual. So we built, and I think it's two in New Zealand. I think there's 2 in Australia. I hear there's like 1 in the UK. So like it's one of
very few,
like an exclusive club, which it shouldn't be. It shouldn't be part of an exclusive club, but it is. So we built an abattoir. So that's a slaughterhouse for everybody else. So the slaughterhouse. It means the advantage is the lambs don't go on a stock truck. They never leave the farm. So there's no stress to the animal. The animal's just in its natural environment doing its natural thing. And that's key if you're chasing the very best meat-eating quality that you can. So like we know good food. Like, we've eaten some fantastic restaurants around the world, and obviously my wife knows how to cook pretty good. So we thought, look, we've slaughtered lambs ourselves on the farm, and they always taste sweeter, they're more succulent. Can we like industrialize this? And that was where building the abattoir came in. So alongside the abattoir, we also have a butchery. And in the butchery, we have several butchers in there working, breaking down the lambs. And kind of from that point, our sales team manages the relationships. So we're in about 200 cafes and restaurants in New Zealand, which again is really unusual because almost all of New Zealand produce goes overseas.
Right.
New Zealand's an export nation. And kind of the sad part to that is our best produce always goes overseas. So
because that's the most valuable, right?
Well, that's where you get the margins.
Right.
Like you're going to get paid more for lamb in some other part of the world than
California.
Yeah, exactly. So that's what ends up happening. Like the best fish ends up in a Chinese restaurant. It never stays for the locals to eat. But there's some amazing restaurants in New Zealand, and so basically by us doing what we're doing, we can just have a direct relationship with each one of those restaurants or cafes or bars or whatever they're doing, and that's great. It means I get to eat out of all these amazing places all the time.
Yep.
And try our produce, which, by the way, is seriously one of the most interesting things you can do is go to a restaurant and eat something that you've grown, because, by gosh,
that's pretty neat experience.
That's a very humbling experience, that is, when someone's taken it and just done something incredible, like, a 3-star kind of meal, and you're thinking, my team's grown this. That's special. The takeaway point, if you boil all this down, was there was a lot of paperwork, a huge amount of administration and compliance. Like regulatory compliance has been massive. Like there's been no easy way of jumping through those hoops. And I'll be honest, like it came at quite a high price point. A lot of farmers would look at that and say, "Oh, Carlos, that was fine. You'd floated the company on the stock exchange. You probably had some capital," and we did. Is there an easy way of doing it? No. Is that right? Definitely not. Like, I think there's a lot of places in the world where having that relationship, that local relationship, is missed. We see it probably more in other industries. We probably see that more in the beverage industry. Would probably be a good example of an industry where craft breweries or small distilleries or wineries have these wonderful relationships, and you get to celebrate their brand or the winemaker or the terroir where the grapes are grown. Like, I think that's really special.
Yeah.
I think a lot of meat producers or arable farmers
don't
get to have that experience. And that's kind of a bit sad. So that's probably one takeaway point. And the second one really would be the fact that, I would say, if you're a farmer, there's a real risk that sometimes we fall into this trap, and I did to start with, which is falling into this trap that we're farmers, and that's all we're only farmers. You're not. You're doing something super special. You're doing something really empowering. Like you're feeding communities. You're actually feeding people. That is one of the most intimate relationships you could ever have with somebody. That's the truth. It's one of those intimate relationships. And so I always tell my team that, yes, you're farmers, but you're also food producers. And I think when my team hear that and they think about, we're growing food, there's kind of that extra level of care and love in what they do, and it creates a lot of job satisfaction, or at least I hope it creates a lot of job satisfaction, that they believe what they're doing is special.
So you're talking about the connection, try to build that connection that your employees on your farm feel, yes, of not just producing a commodity, but producing food to feed somebody. Tell me why that matters.
When you're managing staff, there's always this presumption that they're only motivated by money, and that's just not the truth.
Yeah.
I think that people are motivated by purpose and vision. So for us to say, look, we're not just producing, we're not just farmers. Like, I'm not putting down the term farmers, because that's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is I think farmers are so much more than just that. And I think it's really important for staff who are working in agriculture or horticulture or viticulture or whatever, aquaculture, whatever they're into, is kind of that step back and go, you know what, like we're arguably the most important part of any workplace that there is. Like we're, sure, like, we're filming this on a smartphone and we've got all this fancy gear here, but that's all great, and it's useful. But what we absolutely need what's essential for survival, for life, is food. And I can't help but, I'm not sure what it's like in the States, but certainly in New Zealand there has been some negativity towards farmers and to landowners. It's kind of a bit of a sign of the times where, we're considered to be all the bad things in the world. We produce too much methane. Greenhouse gases are too high. instead of looking at all the positive attributes that we're doing, all the wetland development that we're trying to establish, all the riparian planting that we're trying to do around waterways, and of trying to sequester more carbon in the soil, and managing livestock the most humane way possible. Instead of sort of talking about that, there has been this risk that we've fallen talking about the negatives, and your staff will feel that. Your staff read newspapers and watch television and are on social media. Like they hear that, they feel that. So I think it's when you bring things back to that, like such an intimate perspective of, someone somewhere in the world is going to sit down and eat this. And even if you're producing feed for livestock, it's the same thing, right?
Yeah.
Like it's still super important. Like you're providing sustenance to an animal somewhere else. That's not to be underestimated.
Yeah. So Carlos, what are you doing today? Obviously we're sitting here on the start of our Nuffield journey, but back home, what are you doing today?
So back in New Zealand, well, this is a strange thing to admit. We're filming a TV show. So we've got a TV show. Well, depending on where you are in the world, it's got different names. But the first season came out last year, and anybody who's watched Clarkson's Farm will probably, be like, "Oh, you've copied Clarkson's Farm." We were filming at exactly the same time, and two shows came out within about 3 weeks of each other. His in the UK and ours in New Zealand. In New Zealand, it's called Nadia's Farm. In offshore markets, so certainly in Australia, it's called High Country Farm. And it follows our journey of starting all of these little enterprises, of like starting a little retail store, of starting the abattoir, building the butchery. It's actually a really interesting time capsule. Like it's one of those things that you look back in 20 years and you're like, oh gosh, man, I had some energy then.
But you're glad you captured it, right?
Yeah. But it's the trials and tribulations of producing food at scale, and I'd say kind of throughout it, it's a very real experience. It's quite a, we don't shy away from stuff. So there's some guts and glory through it. It went really well in New Zealand. So it was one of New Zealand's highest rating primetime shows. And so Warner Brothers, who we filmed it with, were like, look, can we do another one? Can we do another one? And so we sort of reluctantly agreed to doing a second season, only on the basis that the farmers who I was really worried about the agricultural community being negative on it, because of course they see people who have come from a different industry, and certainly one who's very well known. My wife's very well known in New Zealand, and there was a concern that it might be perceived as, we're taking the mix somehow, right? But that wasn't the case. The farmers loved it. They were sort of arguably the biggest advocates of the show. And we thought, well, okay, if they're liking it, we'll give them another season. So when I get back to New Zealand, I go straight back to Auckland for publicity. So it's sitting down with the media again and sort of promoting the second season, which starts airing I think 2 days after I arrive home. So that's the first thing. And the second thing is a bit of a passion project, right? So I love beer. Well, I love beer.
Oh, yeah.
I think everybody here on this Nuffield journey is like, Carlos loves beer.
Especially when it's 100 degrees.
Yeah, I was thinking, I was like, this is literally sticking to me. It's like so hot here. So we produce really good barley, and the farm has always produced good barley. And just like I said, instead of just it being a commodity that we put on a truck and we wave goodbye to, what else could we do with it? So we ended up malting a small amount. I think we malted 80 tons, and that 80 tons so that's not all the barley we produce. It's a small part of the barley we produce, but we kept aside, I think, what I reckon was the best barley that we had. We had it malted, and we did two things. We made whiskey with it, but we also did the beer with it. And the beer launches middle of this coming month, and the beer name is Swifty, and it's just one of my favorite things I've ever done in my life. It was so much fun. Like working on the branding for Swifty was great. We were taking a lot of cues from sort of 1970s, 1980s classic advertising advertisements. You think of, Camel smokes and the Marlboro Man and like all that sort of stuff. And it kind of created like a really fun, well, I think quite a fun brand that's just like uncomplicated. It's a beer, like it's not about the hops. It's not about the barley. It's not about, it tastes like a chocolate milk stout sort of like, it's none of that nonsense. It's just a straight up easy drinking beer, and I think that's what we need right now. I think the world needs more
simplicity.
Simplicity. I think the world needs more Swifty.
Yeah. Well, that's going to be a great story. My biggest question for that Is it going to be available in the U.S.?
Oh gosh, if anybody listening to this podcast is like, you know what, we'd love to get Swifty in the US, and my uncle, runs the US's largest alcohol outlet, yeah, please, by all means, contact me.
We'll connect you.
Yeah. Because I'm not quite sure how else I'd actually get it there, but yes, that I would love to, but it will most likely be just New Zealand, followed by Australia, and then unless someone knows somebody.
So what's your aspirations? Why are you continuing to do that?
This has been the fun business, and it's been 12 months of development, right? So that's everything from learning about brewing, understanding all the process, understanding kind of, if you like, all the different players in the industry, and then coming back to what I know, which is the branding, it's the packaging, it's the design, like who's going to drink this beer? Like who is my market? And I feel like we've come to this wonderful sort of point that a lot of people have sort of started to move back towards mainstream beers. They've done the craft beer scene. They love craft beer, but they, there's a bit of I can produce this for a lot cheaper because we've got huge production. So we can produce this for a lot cheaper than a craft brewery can, but it's the same quality, but it's just easier to drink. So I think it's reformed craft beer drinkers. I'm hoping to capture them. I'm hoping to catch some craft beer drinkers, but I'm ultimately trying to capture the mass. It's like give them something that they go, wow, actually I aspire to drink that because that's just cool.
And are you trying to capture that whole farm to consumer story with that brand as well?
Not so much. So it's there in the background, but it's not the primary focus, which is interesting. That's a really good question. Like, why wouldn't I push it harder? And I might. So that's right. So the beer comes out in like 2 weeks' time. And the promotion that sits behind it is still probably the one element that we haven't all agreed on. Like what actually, how are we promoting this? And, I think anybody listening to this will be like, oh, I would do it this way or that way. And kind of actually interested to hear your thoughts on that, because that's not, when you put a beer into the market, it's a really saturated market. There's 300 craft breweries in New Zealand, like 5 million people, 300 craft breweries. And each
one for every town.
I was going to say, and each one of those breweries probably has an average of five main beers, and then they'll do seasonal beers. So when you think, and then you've got your mainstream beers, and all international beers. We get all international beers in New Zealand, plus all the mainstream New Zealand beers. I mean, gosh, there'd easily be 1,000 beers in New Zealand. So how do you get cut through in a hyper saturated and hyper sophisticated market? You would have heard of sort of blue ocean, red ocean.
Yeah.
It's like, so I'm really jumping straight in with, red ocean, trying to make some space for a product that, does the market actually want it? And I think that's where we're going to have to agitate and sort of push a lot. And that's
where it came from.
Well,
right?
And that's why I kind of want to do it, maybe to prove to myself that it's possible. And if it fails, which 12 months time, you're like, hey Carlos, did that work? I'm like, no, it was a waste of money. But if it works, and it's a toy and cost if it does, but if it does, there'll be no greater satisfaction. That's running an impossible race. And I actually believe that I've got a.
So does that business excite you more than your original business that you sold or the farm?
No. I like all of those businesses have been. All of the businesses have been a part of me, and are still part of me. Would one excite me more than the next? No. I mean, my food bag had enormous scale, enormous growth potential, and I've always sort of maintained for a business to be the perfect business in my mind is one that's scalable, one that's exportable, and one that's sellable. And my food bag was all of those things. You could take that concept and take it to a different market. It scaled up massively quickly. We went from, I remember in the first, was it the first three months, we made it to $2 or $3 million worth of turnover. By the end of that year, we were at 20 million turnover. It was just it was just after, I think by year 2 or 3, it was doing 100 million. It was just the afterburners were just racing. Royal Burn is a business that's not scalable, that's not exportable, and it's not really sellable because it's my home. So it doesn't take any of those things. But then Swifty is all three of those things. It's hugely scalable, massively scalable. There's no limit how much beer you can produce. It's so someone in the US wants to buy you, categorically it's exportable. You'd probably manufacture it in the US.
Yeah.
But the third one is it sellable? Yes. You get in the way of the big breweries, whatever it is, and who knows what's possible. So, does one excite me more than the other? They're all different experiences, and I'm just glad I've done them. I think life's too short to sit back and, I often think, what would 80-year-old Carlos think, sort of lying around in a lounge chair, passing the day away,
Drinking a Swifty.
Like, would I be proud of myself for pushing on? I think the answer is yes, categorically yes.
So with that, I asked you this question earlier this week. What really drives Carlos and why?
I'm still trying to figure out the answer to this. What drives me and why? I think from a personality perspective, I'm very curious.
That's for sure. I've noticed that.
I'm very interested in people. I'm very interested in the decisions people make. And that's combined with kind of a level of, I've got a very high tolerance to risk. So like you do those risk like category things and you work through, and I've done several of them. And I'm kind of always on sort of the edge of, I'm borderline reckless. It's kind of like,
a lot of entrepreneurs are.
Yeah, and I think you have to be. It takes like a level of internal commitment and belief to do something. So I don't know that it's necessarily what drives me in so much as that's my personality, and therefore it's like a Labrador, right? Like the Labrador wants to swim and bring back sticks and stuff, right? Like that's me, and so there's no point pretending to be anything other than that. But I guess underpinning a lot of things is it's what drives me would be purpose. Like what things can I leave behind? What things can I do that I look back at a legacy, or maybe not even a legacy, but I look back on it in my life and go, you know what, I'm kind of proud of that. Like I'm proud of my food bag. It was, like every week, 30, 40,000 people, like family. So, that's what 150, 200,000 people potentially.
Right.
Are like eating the food that we've put together. That's like, we've done millions of meals. We've taught kids how to cook. We've taught spouses how to cook. We've got people re-engaged around the dinner table. We've got people celebrating food. I'm proud of that. I'm proud of Royal Burn. I think Royal Burn has demonstrated that you can be hyper-local, right, and profitable, and you can farm a different system that, like it's that like single loop system where, we grow all this stuff and then we supply it into the market. I'm proud of that. I'm proud of my team. And I think Swifty just tastes great. Am I proud of, but like, it's not, Swifty's not going to change the world maybe the way the other ones have.
Yeah.
But I'll be most proud of myself if Swifty succeeds because
it's just a challenge.
Because it was probably the biggest challenge of all of those.
Yeah, I could see that because, like you said earlier, you are going into a very saturated market with that one. So that was something I was curious on. What really drove you to want to do that? As you said, this is a challenge. Well, this has been really inspirational to get to know you this week, to hear your story. Appreciate you sharing it. You've had some very valuable questions that you've brought up among the groups that we've been in and just talking one-on-one. I've really enjoyed that this week. If you want to tell the listeners what you're doing here at Nuffield, why you decided to come on this journey.
Yeah, well, I think Nuffield's I'm guessing you've explained what Nuffield is, but I didn't know much about it at all until last year, and we had 200 Nuffield scholars turn up to the farm, and I gave them a big tour, and I spoke to each one of these scholars, well, as many as I could in the short time I was there, and I was blown away with the breadth of knowledge and skill and expertise and just curiosity around agriculture. So I chucked my head in the ring this year and got the scholarship, and my intention was to try to figure out what is the future of food. Who's going to be producing it? So I'm talking 25, 50 years time. Who's going to be producing it? How are they going to be producing it? And what is their role in the value chain? Because my suspicion is there's a lot of changes in how food's being produced and by whom. Really, it's kind of like from an ownership perspective. All of that's morphing. So it's a very interesting space. There's a lot of macroeconomics. There's a lot of geopolitical stuff in there, and I think that stuff spins my wheels. So if I end doing that, I'm not sure, but that's certainly that's my intent to try to get underneath the covers a wee bit of that question.
Yeah, well, that's great. Carlos, how can people find out more about you, follow your journey along with your farm, with Swifty, and what
Sure.
you're up to.
Yeah, sure. So the farm on Instagram is Royal Burn. So that's Royal as in ROYALBURN station. So Royal Burn Station, and you'll find our Instagram channel there. My wife's name, if you're interested in cookbooks and that sort of stuff, she's got quite a large social media following, and you'll find her. Just Google Nadia Lim. So that's Nadia Lim, LIM. And Swifty is spelled SWIFTY, not IE. So it's got nothing to do with Taylor Swift. It's definitely a Y, and that's that's new, right? So there's not heaps going on there, but certainly you'll find quite a lot of information on Nadia and the farm as well.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Carlos. I really appreciate you being on today.
No, thank you very much, and thanks for listening. If you've made it this far, thank you for listening.
Until next time, this is Paul Windemaller with Carlos.